Chapter 38. Desperate Times. Twilight stood in absolute silence as she waded through Applejack's story. At Fluttershy's request, the Earth Pony was recounting the events that had brought her here, and based on what she was saying, it wasn't a challenge to see why she had come to Fluttershy in the first place. It was well-known knowledge that Fluttershy was Ponyville's resident animal expert, and even without her veterinary expertise, meaning that she was on the top of the list of ponies to call on when anything animal-related was happening. And the sighting of what seemed to be an unknown animal definitely fell into that category. But for the duration of the admittedly short story, it took all of Twilight's inner strength and willpower to keep from exploding at Applejack for referring to her son as some kind of snake dog thing, and to keep herself from rushing out in another panicked frenzy before she could get the information she needed.
I didn't even have time to get a good look at it myself. It ran off way too fast. But I know it went down Market Street towards Town Hall.
Applejack explained with a mixture of haste and confusion. It was apparent enough that she didn't know why she was repeating this story for Twilight, but it wasn't enough to keep her from doing so. Although Twilight's current expression seemed like it was coming close to making her stop, she was glancing back over to Fluttershy every now and then, with noticeable hesitance.
It freaked the ever-living daylights out of everyone to boot. Big Mac said its mouth was all bloody, and...
Bloody?
The color drained from Fluttershy's face, this part of the story being new to her as well. Her eyes immediately shot to Twilight, almost as concerned as the alicorn was.
Why would he be bloody? Did he get hurt?
Twilight pulled her wounded leg up towards her body as if to keep it hidden. Not that anyone could see it under her cloak. She knew why Spike would be covered in blood, and her bite wound stung in response. It was yet another thing to add to the list of things that she couldn't help but blame herself for today, doubly so knowing that it was her blood that was dripping from his face. And that crimson red would be more than enough to make Spike look like a vicious wild animal, which both explained Applejack's uneasy personage, as well as serving to further agitate Twilight.
You two know that critter?
Applejack asked bluntly with a mixture of relief and renewed panic.
What is it? Why is it in Ponyville? What's it gonna...
She stopped herself short on the last question, her eyes now wide in response to a sudden realization. The gears in her head were turning, and she swiftly glanced back and forth between Fluttershy and Twilight.
Twilight? Is there something bigger going on here?
She asked in a hushed tone, glancing over to Fluttershy one last time before going on.
Don't tell me this has something to do with... you know who.
There was an honest moment where Twilight, in her enraged and uneasy state, didn't have any idea what Applejack was talking about. She showed this with a narrow-eyed grimace and a slow shake of her head. It was only after a few seconds that Twilight was able to catch on to Applejack's train of thought and remember what she was going on about. Twilight had promised to take care of the issues with Knox Onwood and whatever it was he was scheming behind the scenes. A promise that had been a byproduct of her curiosity, and had eventually led her to want to solve these issues on her own. And how she had mentioned Fluttershy's limited knowledge of the situation just yesterday at the train station. From there, it was simple enough to see how Applejack had managed to connect all of this back to Onwood, even if she was as far off the mark as she could be right now.
No, it's got nothing to do with any of that.
Twilight's snappy response to Applejack was kept brief as she looked back to Fluttershy.
And no, he's not hurt. At least, he wasn't the last time I saw him. Then why is he covered in blood?
Fluttershy's question wasn't as unreasonable by any stretch of the imagination.
What in the world happened?
Did it kill someone's cat or something?
Applejack asked, freaking out more as something she overheard on the way here came to mind.
He bit me, all right?
Twilight shouted back without thinking. causing an uncomfortable silence to settle over the room. To emphasize her point, she lifted her cloak just enough to show the dressed wound, taking shame in what she had admitted as the eyes fell on the bandages.
It was an accident.
She quickly tried to explain.
There was an accident. He probably blames himself. That's why he ran away. And I need to find him before someone else does.
That was the last thing Twilight said before she took off running. Applejack yelped loudly as Twilight slipped around her, and Fluttershy barked out something to try and get Twilight to stop. But neither of those things reached her ears as she pressed onward, and chose to focus on the brighter half of the conversation. She now knew the general direction Spike had been headed in, a vast improvement over what she had to work with earlier. Though this glint of hope was still far outmatched by anxiety and dread. The worst possible scenario had made itself a reality, and now the whole of Ponyville was looking for the Long Dragon alongside Twilight. While things had improved, it still wasn't optimal, and it only got worse as she kept racing through the town. She couldn't help but catch sight of citizens out and about. It seemed that news about Spike had spread like a plague, and had prompted a series of town guards, easily identified by the uniform sashes and simplistic helmets they wore, to begin searching high and low for the little guy. Most bore ropes and nets at the ready for when they found their unidentified creature, giving Twilight a brief moment of respite knowing that they weren't going to try and kill him. It wasn't much, but it was a small victory. But the town guards weren't alone in their efforts, as several civilians were also trying to find Spike. Those who were bold enough to help out in the efforts were using the same methods as the town guards, while others were trying to set up makeshift traps, though most of them seemed to care more about seeing the Long Dragon rather than capturing him, made evident by the cameras they were carrying around instead of anything practical. The town guards' efforts were split down the middle, trying to get these bolder ponies to cease and go home, though they weren't having much luck on that front either. Nobody, as of yet, had elected to grab any kind of weapon, as far as Twilight could see at least. Even so, the thought of one of these people finding Spike first was torturous in itself. The idea of her precious baby being caught, muzzled, and thrown into a cage and shipped off to who knew where was the most pleasant of the scenarios her mind was able to present her. All of the others were far too grisly for her to even entertain.
He went towards City Hall.
Twilight kept telling herself, over and over again in some attempt to drown out the other thoughts in her head.
He's gotta be around there somewhere.
It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her focused. The market street was nothing but a blur as Twilight doubled her efforts, knowing well that she would need to make up for the significant head start Spike had gotten on her. It wasn't easy, but at least she wouldn't draw any more unneeded attention to herself, not with the whole town searching for the same thing she was. If anything, she was blending in more than she ever had before. Not that she had the time or patience to appreciate that right now. And so she went back to frantically searching for any sign of her little Long Dragon just as she had earlier. She poked her head into just about every nook and cranny she could find that looked big enough for Spike to hide in, making sure to keep an ear open for any sort of scream or shout that might indicate someone had caught him. That was the absolute worst-case scenario, but it was the one she had to be prepared for. Just in case. Excuse me, miss? A gruff voice tempered by years of hard work suddenly asked from behind her. When Twilight turned and faced it, she saw that the voice belonged to an older Earth Pony guard who wasn't too amused by her joining in the hunt. There's an unidentified creature that was seen in town. We don't know if it's dangerous or not, so we need you to go back to your home.
He's not dangerous.
Twilight bitterly spoke without thinking, insulted by the implication that her son was a threat to anyone.
He's just scared.
I'm sorry, what? The reaction got the stoic stallion off guard, shown by the raising of a curious and intrigued eyebrow. Do you know anything about this animal?
Horse apples.
It was now that Twilight came to share a similar sense of shock as the guard, as well as an immediate sense of regret and self-loathing. That, on top of the panic she was already feeling from the entire day, was enough to drive her to make yet another stupid decision to try and get out of this mess. Somewhere deep down, she knew this was stupid and that there would be consequences, but right now, she really didn't care. I'm going to need you to... That was all the Earth Pony guard was able to say, before a flash from Twilight's horn caused his very existence to cease. For about a millisecond before he reappeared on the other side of town, no worse for wear. He was probably startled and confused. Spontaneous and unexpected teleportation will do that to someone. But unless Twilight had royally botched up the spell, he wouldn't be hurt. Just displaced. It gave Twilight a bit more time to act on her own before she'd have to deal with him again. Hopefully she'd be able to find Spike by then, seeing as how the guard would no doubt bring a few friends with him to try and apprehend her next time. But that was a problem to be dealt with later, as Twilight was keen on getting back to her search for Spike. Though while she planned to keep searching for her son with nary another interruption, that interruption came regardless of her feelings when she came around a corner to the last two ponies she wanted to see right now. Pinkie Pie and Rarity were out and about, still together for one reason or another. It was obvious why Pinkie was out here, with how she was snooping around with a camera dangling from her neck. She was trying to find Spike, just like everyone else in town. Rarity's presence was harder to pin down, though, as she didn't look like she was helping with the efforts at all. But that question was answered when she continued to speak.
I still don't see how you're okay with all of this.
Rarity went on in an exasperated tone, following Pinkie around as the latter continued the search for the missing dragon.
She's clearly deranged and dangerous. We have to tell someone about her.
It was clear now that the two were talking about their run-in with Twilight, and that they had yet to notice her arrival on the scene. Despite everything going on in Twilight's head, this caught her attention. Based on what she had just overheard, Rarity had walked away from that encounter with a very new opinion of her. And in her emotionally distraught state, Twilight couldn't help but stop for a moment and listen to what Rarity had to say.
Rarity, it's Twilight. She's not going to do anything.
Pinkie argued back, only half invested in the argument, the rest of her focus going towards searching for the long dragon that was loose in town.
If she was going to, she would have done something already. You did see how angry she was, right?
Rarity asked almost mockingly.
I can't be the only one who saw that tantrum she threw. That couch could have been us.
That was what got Pinkie to stop and face her friend, a stern look on her face.
And did you see how much I hurt her by barging in like that? I've already caused her enough problems today. I don't want to cause her any more. Oh, Pinkie, you couldn't have known she was... Don't say it! I promised we wouldn't say anything. But we have to tell someone.
Twilight's outburst from earlier didn't just have a lasting impact on Spike. It must have shaken up Rarity pretty bad, too. Not that Twilight could blame her. She'd probably feel the same way if their roles were reversed.
Just think of what...
And that's where Twilight's observation of the conversation ended. What goes around, comes around, and her earlier transgression against one of Ponyville's guards came back around to bite her in the butt in the form of an almost blinding flash of blue light. She recognized the familiar feeling of teleportation, though it was an odd sensation when she wasn't the one who triggered it. She reappeared shortly after a fair distance, and it became abundantly clear who the culprit behind her sudden displacement was. Starlight Glimmer was just standing there, in front of Twilight, waiting with a look of mixed stress and panic, not unlike Twilight's own.
You again?
Twilight blurted, not exactly happy to see Onwood's accomplice right now. This displeasure was only matched by confusion, as even now Twilight knew that this mare should also be on the guard's list of arrests to make.
What are you? He went that way, towards Sweet Apple Acres.
The unicorn spoke bluntly, jutting her head off to the left to indicate the direction she was talking about.
Saw some guards headed that way. They didn't make a fuss about it, for obvious reasons.
She gingerly gestured a hoof off to the right, and a series of ponies searching high and low for the unknown creature spotted in their town. Twilight was caught off guard by this statement. It was the last thing she had expected to hear, and it had come from the last person she had expected to hear it from. There was no way this pony could be talking about Spike. Right? How in the world did she even know about him? It didn't add up. There had to be something else going on here. Something to do with Nox and that whole mess Twilight had gotten mixed up in. That had to be it, she thought.
You know, the little, snake, dog, dragon-looking guy, right?
Starlight spoke again, trailing off mid-sentence as if she didn't quite know how to describe him.
He's probably at Sweet Apple Acres by now. If you hurry, you might find him first.
Just like that, Twilight's confusion was swallowed up by rage. With that one sentence, Starlight Glimmer had shown that she knew far more than Twilight expected of her, and the implications were heavy. Had she been spying on her? How much did she know? And what was her game? All these questions and more suddenly began to ring in Twilight's head, and each one demanded answers.
How do you? I'd love to explain. I really would. But I don't think either of us has time for that.
Starlight took a few steps back with great haste, nervousness washing over her as the conversation went on.
We both have places we need to be right now.
And just as she had brought Twilight here in a burst of blue light, so too did Starlight make her exit, blinking out of existence with a magical pop, and leaving Twilight alone with nothing else but a series of unanswered questions and a few more gallons added to the sea of anxieties and frustrations she'd been swimming in all day. That brief interaction with Starlight had brought more than a few things into question and reconsideration, and the young alicorn wasn't sure what any of it meant. She looked in the direction Starlight had pointed her in with longing and concern. Had Spike really run off that way? It was possible. But what reason would that unicorn have for telling Twilight anything? How would she even know Twilight was looking for him in the first place? It was frustratingly nonsensical, just like Starlight's actions from the previous night. And that wasn't something that was lost on Twilight. If nothing else, she knew that this Starlight Glimmer was up to something else. But whatever it was, Twilight didn't know. Right now, she was solely focused on deciding whether or not she should take Starlight's tip or continue searching of her own accord. It was far too specific advice to just be a coincidence. Starlight wanted Twilight to head to Sweet Apple Acres for one reason or another. Maybe Spike was there right now, doing what he could to avoid being caught by the town guards who were supposedly on his trail. Or maybe this was a trap devised by Nox's associates to get the upper hoof on Twilight, which also wasn't out of the realm of possibility. It was a tough choice to make, but her desperation and stress expedited the deciding process significantly. Without delay, Twilight ran off towards Sweet Apple Acres, where one of two things were going to happen. She was either going to find her son, or she would make life very unpleasant for whatever poor, unfortunate fool thought that ambushing an angry alicorn was in any way a good idea.